Jim Jones. Who is Jim Jones? Like, he's not on anyone's top 10 list. He's like no one's top 10 list, maybe not even his family.
I'm scared to hustle because niggas is snitching so much. Maybe that's what's going on. I would be scared to hustle too when I know that every other nigga is snitching just so he don't want to do no time because he can't bear the.
What if Jim Jones was never really the mastermind he claimed to be? What if all that chest thumping about building this was just smoke and mirrors, loud words with no weight behind them? Maybe he wasn't the engine driving the Dipset legacy, but just the guy yelling the loudest while others did the heavy lifting. Picture it. While Cam'ron and Joel's were laying down the blueprint, crafting the sound and the style that defined an era, Jim was more of a hype man than a head honcho watching from the wings, not directing the play. He wasn't leading the charge. He was clapping from the sidelines, soaking up spotlight he didn't earn. And the truth, he's been dodging it for years. Every so-called power move he made leaned on the backs of the very legends he now tries to outshine. Let's get one thing straight: I never needed a place to crash. You weren't doing favors, you were chasing proximity. You were a fan first. You begged to be down. Don't rewrite history. Back when Dipset ruled the streets, and diplomatic immunity was more than just an album, it was a cultural wave. You were lucky just to be in the frame. The movement was built by visionaries, not opportunists. Now, the myth you spun, the image you polished into something golden, it's starting to fall apart. The real architects are stirring. They've watched long enough from the shadows, and now they're ready to speak. The truth is coming out loud, clear, and undeniable. This was never about hustle. It's about how long someone can wear a crown they never earned before the kingdom they borrowed from kicks them out for good. In hip-hop, there's a code carved in stone. Respect isn't handed out, it's earned in blood, sweat, and legacy. You don't get to claim turf you never bled for. You don't get to rewrite your past just because the lights got hotter and the cameras turned your way. And you sure as hell can't try to erase the very people who gave your name weight in the first place. For 2 decades, Jim Jones has been bending the rules, twisting street ethics like they were made of rubber bands. But here's the plot twist: the same crew that helped lift him to the top is now the one pulling the rug out from under him. The nerve of it all. This man really stood up with a straight face and called himself the CEO of Dipset, like he was orchestrating every move, like he was the one guarding Cam'ron and Joel's Santana through the trenches. That's not power, that's delusion in designer shades. What Jim's doing now isn't storytelling. It's not showmanship. It's identity theft, plain and simple. And in Harlem, that's not just disrespect, that's dangerous. You fake it in those streets. And it doesn't take long for fiction to meet consequences. But here's what makes it surreal. He says it all so smooth. Like he's convinced himself that the lie is the truth. Like he's forgotten who really built the dynasty he's now trying to claim as his own. But reality, it always comes knocking, and this time it's kicking down the door.
It is like certain people shouldn't be able to say your names until they've done something in the genre of music. I've done too much in this music to even have to answer that question. Like Jim Jones, who is Jim Jones? Like, he's not on anyone's top 10 list. He's like no one's top 10 list, maybe not even his family. I was saying last night, it's like the 8th guy on the bench just screaming at Jordan, like, you a bum. Like, you like the 9th guy on the bench. I'm not even worried.
Harlem knows its own. Real ones don't need to keep screaming where they're from. It's in how they move, how they talk, how they carry the weight of the block. But when you keep repeating the same story for so long, something dangerous happens. You stop pretending and start believing your own myth. And that's where the fall begins. Because when your whole persona is stitched together from borrowed glow, there's always a day when the original light sources show up to collect. And trust, they're not tapping politely on your door. They're kicking it in. That's exactly what happened when Cam'ron and Ma Dollery finally stepped forward. They didn't just correct the record, they lit it on fire. One line, one moment, and Jim's carefully crafted illusion unraveled. Ma Dollar dropped it cold and clean. You were our fan, ninja. Not a partner, not a leader, just a fan who got close enough to catch the heat and tried to claim he started the fire in Harlem. That kind of truth hits harder than any diss track. And once it's out there, there's no spinning it back.
Rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine pleaded guilty to federal charges, admitting he participated in a violent gang. He also pledged to cooperate with prosecutors. The rapper, whose legal name is Daniel Hernandez, said he joined the 9 Trey Blood gang in the fall of 2017. He says he helped them try to kill a rival gang member last March. Prosecutors say the gang carried out acts of murder, robbery, and narcotics trafficking in Manhattan, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. The indictment also said each gang member was required to participate in at least 2 acts of racketeering conspiracy, which could include murder, robbery, extortion, or drug distribution. The plea deal could allow Hernandez leniency at sentencing. He was facing a mandatory 40.
In hip-hop, your name is your currency. And in Harlem, people know who stamped your name and who let you borrow theirs. Real ones never have to remind you where they're from. It's written in their walk, their talk, and their track record. But when someone keeps screaming Harlem every 5 seconds, it's usually a cover for something missing. A mask for a truth they're too afraid to face. Jim Jones built a persona on volume, not vision. For 20 years, he ran with a narrative that made him look like the architect, the boss, the backbone, the CEO of Dipset. But when the fog cleared, what stood there wasn't a leader. It was a fan who snuck into history's photo and yelled loud, enough to look important. Then came the collapse. 4 words that crushed decades of fronting. He taught me how to rap. That's all it took. Cam'ron and MASE didn't go on a smear campaign. They dropped facts like grenades. Not out of jealousy. Not for clout. Just to restore the real story. Cam built the empire. MASE gave Jim his first tools. And Jim, he was never behind the wheel. He was along for the ride. You were our fan. That was MASE's mic drop moment. Clean, sharp, truth wrapped in a dagger. Jim wasn't the one making power plays. He was the one tagging along, catching second-hand heat from guys who already had the streets locked. And it gets deeper. Jim went on camera and said it himself. MASE showed him the ropes, sat him down, taught him how to rap. That's not just a casual memory. That's a confession that torches the whole myth he's been feeding the culture. If you didn't build the foundation, you can't claim the throne. You didn't lay bricks. You watched others stack them and called yourself the foreman. Even Cam kept it raw. I only put you down because you had a free crib and were a nice guy. That's not how you recruit a co-founder. That's how you let your homie tag along, because he's around, not because he's ready. Jim wasn't Dipset's engine, he was the extra luggage. And now the receipts are pouring out like leaked footage from the vault. Old interviews, mixtapes, shoutouts, they all tell a story Jim's tried to bury. But here's the catch. The internet never forgets. And when truth resurfaces, it don't. Knock, it kicks in the door. He tried to flip the script. Tried to paint Cam as the one needing a couch to crash on. He called himself the protector. The muscle. But the real protectors don't brag, they move in silence. And their loyalty speaks louder than their words. What Jim did was flip the dynamic to make himself the hero in a story he barely helped write. Now, the mask is off. And what's underneath ain't boss material, it's someone who begged for a seat at the table, then acted like he built the table himself. And when you build your career on borrowed glow, the day always comes when the light turns off. Even some of Jim's defenders had to admit, yeah, he was the muscle. He played the enforcer role. But Cam was the heart. Cam was the face. If Dipset were ROCFL, Cam was J. Jim wasn't Dame. He wasn't Biggs. He was the guy making sure the doors stayed locked, not the one signing the deals. And the moment Jim started believing he was equal, started standing next to Cam instead of behind him, that's when things broke. Success started breeding delusion. It's like Sammy the Bull thinking he could become Gotti. That switch in roles created tension. It wasn't about talent. It was about identity. About knowing your place in the blueprint. Jim started rewriting the origin story to fit his ego. But there's a problem with revisionist history. The truth is archived, and the playback button never lies. When your own voice betrays the fantasy you crafted, it's game over. And Cam, he's not yelling. He's not ranting. He's sitting, quiet with receipts, old footage, interviews, facts. That's Harlem justice. When you give your enemies the ammo, they don't need to aim. You already loaded the gun and handed it over. Jim's been remixing reality for years. But now the speakers are blowing out, and the original beat is back. And then Nick got to a point where he stood in front of Cam, and Cam just looked over his shoulder like, "What you doing?" That moment sparked a shift. The tension started building right there. By the time Ballon hit, Cam was carrying a whole load of animosity, real internal hatred. I know because I was there. I was at Jim's party in Alice. You can't gaslight the people who lived through it. When the ones who were actually there hear the lies, those stories become ammo. And right now, Cam, Maze, and the original crew, they're fully loaded. What's wild is Jim can't even clap back anymore. How you gonna argue when it's your own voice airing you out? He said it himself. Maze taught him how to rap. That's not just embarrassing. That's legacy creating. You can't claim to be the architect when you publicly admitted someone else drew the blueprint. The whole boss image gone. But here's the twist. While Jim's been out here, slowly tearing down his own legacy. Lie after lie, the real insiders, the ones who watched Dipset rise from nothing. They've been quiet, just observing. And now they're ready to talk. What they're revealing is about to shake everything up. Because once the hype dies down and the fantasy fades, the truth doesn't come from the loudest voice. It comes from the ones who were really there when it all went down. Jim made a bold move. He said they were on his right, like that meant something serious. It was like he caught a bar, so, of course, the question becomes, what's Cam gonna do now? You think Cam, a true lyricist, is just gonna sit there? Nah. Cam's going to lyrically rip you apart. That man will make you feel stupid in ways that sting deep, old school level, like grabbing your heart mid-electric boogie. Cam, don't play. And here's the real twist. People aren't riding for Jim blindly. They saw the flaws and the real work he put in. That's what makes this deeper rich psychological warfare now. Cam and Maze are trying to erase Jim's impact, making it look like he was never that important. Meanwhile, Jim's camp is pushing back, trying to rewrite him as more than just background noise. But truth, it sits in the middle. This is the street game. It's not about full truth. It's about the version people believe. And right now, Jim's losing. When everyone was on the come up, loyalty was tight. But once one starts shining too bright, jealousy creeps in. That's when you find out who's really riding and who's just faking smiles. Then boom, choke no joke flips the script. Says Cam was the one who couldn't handle Jim's rise. So now the question ain't just if Jim faked the CEO image, it's whether Cam couldn't stand seeing his man in the spotlight. But before you crown choke the truth teller, you gotta peep the agenda. This ain't just commentary, it's personal. Him and Cam got beef. Real smoke. They almost fought just because Choke gave props to a Jim mixtape. That bitterness clouds everything. When Choke calls Jim the muscle, the protector, the one who kept Cam safe, is that truth, or just a jab? Let's look at the timing. Jim dropped a new album, At the Church Steps, in February 2025. Then out of nowhere, Dipset drama explodes again. Coincidence? Not likely. When your buzz is low, stirring up old beef is the fastest way to get attention. And who's always down for that ride? Choke no joke, the king of petty with a mic. Then Juelz Santana drops heat. He breaks down how Jim violated the code jumping on stage with 50 Cent while Dipset was beefing with him. That wasn't just business, that was betrayal. Jim wanted shine so bad, he broke the golden rule. Loyalty during war. And that move, it didn't just damage the brand, it shattered the brotherhood. Dipset wasn't just a crew, it was a culture. And Jim, in trying to escape Cam's shadow, burned the whole house down. Look, I'm not out here for clout or that messy back and forth. I don't talk down, I don't care about all that. People know what I've done. I don't need to keep explaining myself. They can joke, they can dance around the facts, but the truth, they know if I really get upset, it becomes a problem. I could tell stories they don't want told. You heard both of them. They know they can't play with me too much. I gave them room to speak because it don't serve me to respond. I got too much going on. I'm chasing a real bag now. Trying to help more than I ever took. That's how a real one moves. But Jim, let's call it what it is. That ain't loyalty. That's envy in disguise. He wasn't some loyal soldier who got backstabbed, he was the hype man who couldn't handle being second. So, what did he do? He tried to take the spotlight. Even if it meant burning down the legacy that gave him everything. And now, 20 years later, he's still bitter, still pressed. So now he's teaming up with anybody holding a grudge, building a crew out of resentment. Even Freaky Zeke, who tried to stay neutral, is speaking out. This beef wasn't even deep at first. But the second outsiders started stirring it, the whole thing blew up. So who benefits from keeping this pain alive? Simple, the one who ain't got nothing poppin'. Jim's relevance is tied to drama from 2 decades ago. And when a man's out of comebacks, he starts reaching. Threats, sneak disses, intimidation, little shady stunts. That's all he's got left. Jim Jones is about to show the world just how low he'll go when the lies stop working and the spotlight fades, and then Cam comes in. Surgical with it. He ain't just clapping back, he's dismantling Jim's entire street image, brick by brick. This ain't just beef, this is a character assassination backed by receipts. Cam says Jim got no code, no pride, no loyalty, just thirst for He's got witnesses. And the craziest part, Cam ain't even mad, he's bored. In the streets, that's the deepest disrespect. You're not even worth energy. That's checkmate. Cam's out building empires. Jim, still chasing a fantasy that never existed, and now that the truth's out, Jim dives into the gutter. Instead of addressing the facts, he goes full petty, starts talking about exposing secrets, but never denies a single claim. Not one. When that doesn't land, he sinks lower body shaming. A grown man telling Maze to go on a diet, talking about his neck, waist, saying he looks crazy. That's not street. That's middle school. From claiming he's CEO of Dipset to throwing playground insults, it's sad, chasing clout in the shadows. The double standard in Jim Jones versus Cam'ron at S become almost routine at this point. Jim Jones pops up on yet another podcast, another YouTube channel, another hip-hop outlet, throwing shade in Cam'ron's direction. The headline is always similar. Jim says Cam went viral for attention. Jim calls out Cam for chasing clout. But if you take a step back and really look at the pattern, it's hard not to notice the irony. Who's really chasing clout here? Because while Cam'ron goes viral maybe once or twice a year off something natural on Instagram post, a funny clip, a sports commentary moment, it's Jim who's on an unofficial press tour. XXL, Cam Capone, Vlad TV, random up-and-coming YouTubers. Complex. No platform seems too big or too small. Meanwhile, anytime a real question comes up, whether it's about Cam, Maze, or the deeper story of Dipset, suddenly, the energy shifts. Silence. Dodging. Deflecting. Changing the subject. It's a pattern, and it's worth breaking down because it says a lot not just about Jim Jones, but about the current media ecosystem, where narratives get spun louder than facts, and calling someone else a clout chaser becomes its own form of clout-chasing. The public persona. Vs. the private reality for anyone following the Dipset saga from the early 2000s until now. It's clear both Cam'ron and Jim Jones have their own lanes. Cam doesn't need to do much to command attention. His sense of humor, his unfiltered takes, and his business ventures from it is what it is. Sports talk show to his music catalog speak for themselves. Jim, on the other hand, seems more actively involved in cultivating a public image. That's not inherently a bad thing. Staying relevant in hip-hop, especially as a veteran, is a grind. But when the constant theme is Cam's doing this for attention, while simultaneously doing back-to-back interviews across every available platform, it's worth questioning who's really driving that narrative. Look through YouTube, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There are interviews from Jim as recent as last week. Clips where he's breaking down Dipset history, sure, but then when it comes to Cam or Maze, things get vague. I don't want to talk about that. We good, I wish him well. Or, sometimes, it's more passive-aggressive, small jabs about loyalty, trust, or business moves, subtle enough to be walked back, pointed enough to fuel more speculation. The economics of controversy. Let's be honest, controversy sells. In 2025's media landscape, where everyone's fighting for views and clicks, a headline like Jim speaks on Cam'ron beef is SEO gold. Platforms know it, fans know it, and Jim knows it. But there's an unspoken rule in hip-hop that gets messy here. You're allowed to air out your grievances. You're allowed to tell your side of the story. What feels off is this huffy energy, leveraging the Dipset name for relevance without actually addressing the core issues. When asked directly about why Dipset really fell apart or where things stand with Cam today, it's rarely a straight answer. Why? Maybe some things are better left unsaid. Or maybe, and more cynically, it's about preserving the mystery. If Jim actually sat down and laid everything out, the allure might fade. The headlines would dry up by keeping things murky, throwing a jab here, dodging a question there. It keeps people talking. It keeps the interviews coming. The quiet power of Cam'ron. In the flip side, you have Cam'ron, who's built an entirely new lane for himself, outside traditional hip-hop. Between hosting a sports show, being a social media personality, and casually dropping music, he's never really had to over-explain himself. And that's part of what makes the accusations of Clout chasing so hollow. When Cam goes viral, it's usually organic. A funny line, a meme-worthy moment, even when it's intentional, like dropping a clever post during NBA playoff season. It feels effortless. That's not the same as booking yourself for multiple interviews in a month, just to rehash the same vague Dipset history. Again, there's nothing wrong with staying active in media. But if we're talking about chasing clout, let's call it what it is. It's especially noticeable because Cam doesn't really show up in these kinds of interviews. He rarely engages in the back and forth unless he absolutely has to. His brand is based on not needing to explain himself, which is a kind of power in itself. When silence speaks louder, there's another layer here too. When Jim deflects certain questions, it signals something to those paying attention, whether it's unresolved tension, respect, or simply a smart PR move. The silences tell their own story. Consider the way Jim will sometimes offer vague compliments about Cam. "That's still my brother, we came up together." That might be true, but it's often sandwiched between veiled shots about loyalty or how things could have gone differently. That kind of selective storytelling plays into the clout ecosystem perfectly. It's just enough information to get people speculating, enough to keep your name in the mix, without actually resolving anything. Why it matters, at the surface level. This might seem like just another rap, beef old friends turned rivals, media stirring the pot. But there's a broader point about authenticity. In the culture, hip-hop, at its best, rewards those who move with integrity. When clout chasing becomes part of the branding, it dilutes that authenticity, and it also creates confusion for younger fans who weren't around for the peak Dipset era. They're getting a version of the story shaped by whoever's talking the loudest. That's why these patterns matter. It's not just about who's making headlines, it's about who's shaping the legacy of one of the most iconic rap collectives of the 2000s. Final thought, who's really winning? At the end of the day, both Cam'ron and Jim Jones have carved out respectable careers. But in terms of public perception, there's a clear difference between moving in silence and moving for attention. Cam doesn't seem to need the constant validation, whether he's dropping a new product line, doing sports commentary, or just living his life. He keeps his name relevant without overexposure. Jim, meanwhile, appears to be in that cycle where the need to stay visible outweighs the content of what's actually being said. So when you hear Jim calling Cam a clout chaser next time, pause for a second. Look at who's really on that press tour. Look at who's answering real questions, and who's dodging them. The pattern speaks for itself. That's what happens when your whole story is a lie. Real questions become landmines. He's confident only when he controls the mic, but once someone else takes the wheel, the act crumbles. You're watching a full-on psychological meltdown. And then comes the final blow from Cam. This ain't about beef anymore, it's about the pattern. Jim drags down every artist that gets close. Cam says working with Jim doesn't lift you, it sinks you. That ain't leadership. That's parasite energy. Let me finish with this. I've never tried to downplay your character. Not once. Not in public, not in private. Even after all the years you spent tearing mine down, piece by piece, throwing little shots in interviews, dropping half-truths in songs, saying just enough to get people whispering but not enough to set the record straight. I held my tongue. I kept it moving. Why? Because at the end of the day, I figured the truth would speak louder than all that noise. Even after you went around claiming you started everything, saying you started Pink, saying you made Dipset, saying you created the Diplomats. I've heard it all. And if that's the story people want to believe, cool. I'm not here to force anybody to see things a certain way. If that version of events makes you feel better, gives you peace, I'll let you have it. But let's be real. If folks really think that's the whole story, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell them to .c. Some of us don't need to shout our resume from the rooftops. Some of us just let our work speak for itself. That's always been my position. I wasn't out here keeping score, trying to win some invisible popularity contest. I wasn't chasing after every camera or mic just to remind people who I am and what I've done. The people who really know, know. And the ones who don't. It doesn't change my day either way. And here's the kicker. I didn't even know about all this latest drama until I got back from vacation. That's the part that made me laugh the most. I was literally off the grid, enjoying some peace for once. No phone, no press, no energy spent worrying about who's saying what. I log back in, and suddenly my name's all over the place. People sending me clips, DMing me links, like, yo, you seen what so-and-so said? And my first reaction, honestly, it wasn't even anger. It wasn't shock. It was just that kind of tired sigh you let out when you realize history keeps repeating itself. Because from my perspective, it really ain't even that serious. It wasn't then, and it ain't now. I wasn't sitting around plotting, trying to stir up some old beef, or reignite some storyline that already had its time. I've been focused on my own thing. Business, family, staying healthy, building new lanes. I thought we'd all grown past the era of throwing subliminals back and forth like kids on social media. But apparently, you made it serious. You kept bringing my name up, kept framing the narrative like there was still something to prove. And now, because of that, everybody sees it for what it really is. The truth has a funny way of rising to the surface. You can spin things your way for a little while, sure. You can hit every interview, every podcast, every YouTube show, repeating the same lines. Building your version of history brick by brick. But eventually, the cracks show. People notice when the story keeps changing. When the details don't quite add up. When the timeline doesn't make sense. And people are smarter than some give them credit for. They might enjoy the gossip and the headlines. But they can tell when it's coming from a real place versus when it's someone just trying to stay relevant. That's really the heart of it. I never needed to remind people what my role was. I never had to scream it from the mountaintops because it's embedded in the culture already. The music, the moments, the influence, that speaks for itself louder than any interview clip ever could. And I want to be clear, it's not even about bitterness. I'm not holding on to old grudges. If anything, it's just disappointment. Because there was a time when all of this could have gone a completely different direction. We could have kept building something instead of tearing it down in slow motion through the media. But here we are, so this is me saying my piece, once and for all. Not as some final shot or to stir things up more. I don't need that kind of energy, but just so it's on record, I've never tried to tear you down. Even when I could have. Even when people asked me to, expected me to, I chose not to, and yet, for years, you've done the opposite. But that's cool, I'm not mad at it. Everyone's got their own way of dealing with things. If yours is going on a press run and telling your side until you believe it yourself, that's your choice. Me. I'll keep moving the way I always have. Focused, quiet when I need to be. Loud only when it really matters. And the people who've been paying attention, who really care about the truth, they see it now. Not because I said so. Not because I made a spectacle out of it. But because patterns reveal themselves over time. And if nothing else, that's the real legacy we leave. Not just what we say, but how we move when nobody's looking. That's all I've got to say on it. You keep posting that Rucker story, Jim got jumped. This happened, that happened. Tell it however you want. I seen that story once, little Cease telling it, and me and Cease. We cool. Always been cool. But he said he punched me in the face. Come on, man. Cease never did that. No shade, but that's just facts. You go to his story online, that's what he's saying. But me and him spoke good. But you keep running around with these 25-year-old stories. You ever hear me talk about when you ran on me? When BMF pulled up and you dipped into that hotel. When they chased you to the beach. You remember that. You lucky I was there. Lucky my man Jojo, and my Spanish homie the one really about life was, with me. I told them, they coming this way, and we handled that. No disrespect, no extra talk, but don't forget what really happened. Blue Da Vinci just told that story recently. He got about 89% of it right. Salute to Blue. I'll tell my version on Talk with Flea when I'm ready. But see, I don't go around pushing that narrative. I don't run my mouth about you getting chased through the sand, soaked in ocean water, looking crazy. I could've, but I didn't. But now, Cam's about to say something that flips the whole script. This is the kill shot. This ain't just another chapter in some Harlem beef. This is Cam'ron dropping the final bomb. The kind that don't just end the argument, it exposes the whole timeline. Jim Jones ain't just throwing jabs lately. He's been on a decade-long bitter press run. That's not beef. That's obsession. The type that grows inside you when you know the last time you mattered was decades ago. And here's the irony. Jim's always yelling he ain't got time for drama. Too focused on the bag. But who's popping up on every podcast, every blog, every YouTube channel? XXL, Cam Capone. Random channels you never heard of. Man's doing a whole clout tour, claiming he too busy for the nonsense while chasing relevance like it's a check. Why? Because the revolution was televised. I'm here. This is what divine timing looks like. God works like that. I'm supposed to be here. But this ain't just three Harlem legends throwing shots. Nah, this goes deeper. This is hip-hop culture on trial. Real versus fake. Builders versus leeches. Creators versus opportunists. This is about who earned their name, and who tried to steal one with smoke, mirrors, and a rewritten history. Jim's rise. It's a cautionary tale. What happens when your whole identity is built on borrowed clout? And now, MASE and Cam, they didn't just respond. They ripped the curtain down. Receipts. Facts. Jim's own voice hammering nails into the myth, one clip at a time. This isn't speculation. This isn't gossip. It's documented. Every contradiction he's ever let slip. Every fake flex that didn't match up when you ran the tape back. Every twisted story that sounded good for the cameras but fell apart under real scrutiny. Exposed, plain and simple. For years, people bought into a certain version of the Dipset story, not because they knew it for themselves, but because the loudest voice in the room kept repeating it. I started this. I made that. I was the one who put it all together. But now, with all the footage out there, the interviews, lined up side by side, there's no hiding from it. The mask slips when you press play. You can literally hear the contradictions unfold in real time. One interview says one thing. 6 months later, it's a whole different version. This wasn't just some quiet L, this was a public demolition of a 20-year-old lie. A house of cards collapsing in full view. All it took was patience and truth finally catching up to the noise. And here's the thing, this isn't about kicking somebody while they're down. It's about setting the record straight. Because for too long, real history got drowned out by ego and revisionist storytelling. For too long, the people who really built this from the ground up got painted as the sidekicks, while someone else played architect. That narrative had its run. But now people are finally connecting the dots. If you've been rocking with this story, if you've been following from the early days, or even if you're just now catching up, don't let it end here. Like the video, share the message, drop a comment and let the world know. The real ones still see through the noise. Because social media is quick to latch onto the flashiest headline, one clip can go viral and twist perception all over again. That's why it matters that the truth gets amplified just as loud as the lie once did. It's easy to sit back and watch, but real ones speak up. Real ones don't let history get rewritten. While they stay quiet on the sidelines, think about how many young fans only know Dipset through scattered YouTube clips, old verses, or Instagram beefs. They weren't there to see it unfold in real time. So they go off whatever's most visible, whatever's being said the loudest today. That's why showing love to content like this matters. It's not just about picking sides, it's about preserving culture the right way, giving credit where credit is actually due. So when you hear somebody still trying to spin that old story, remind them, the facts are out there now. The receipts exist, full clips, not edited soundbites, not rumors, Jim's own voice, his own words. And when somebody's own words don't line up anymore, that's the real tell. At the end of the day, legacies aren't just built on what you say, they're built on what stands up to the test of time. And the test is here now, loud and clear. If you've been following this channel, you already know what it's about. Facts first, narratives second. Not chasing headlines just to stir up controversy, but actually doing the work. Pulling up the footage, connecting the dots, laying it all out so people can see for themselves. So once again, if you rocked with this, do what you do. Like the video, share the message, drop a comment, let people know you're one of the ones who still sees through all the smoke and mirrors, who doesn't get distracted by the latest flashy post or the loudest voice in the room. At the end of the day, it's about keeping things honest, keeping the culture honest, and making sure the next generation gets the real story, not just the remix. Appreciate you for tuning in. Let's keep it moving. We know the difference between loyalty and leechinG. See you in the next one. Stay tapped in. Keep it all the way solid.